A lot of the time, what they call a problem is actually just the tip of the iceberg. There is a root cause more often than not.
Here on Wicked Problems, I talk to a lot of people about the different things they do. People running charge point operating companies, or people talking about new battery technologies, people talking about Earth's changing weather systems, national security, and more besides. All the sort of work that other people, often clients, do. I've thought for a while that it would be quite fun to do one about the sort of work that I do. I mean, not just talk about me, because that would be a bit much, maybe a bit weird. Then I met the amazing Winnie Barnwell at a networking event back in late November of 2025. I say amazing because it turns out we do very much the same thing, just in slightly different niches. So naturally, we clicked. Where I've been working in financial services, insurance, utilities, and lately with EV companies, Winnie has worked with law firms and service-based businesses to reduce admin, eliminate efficiencies, and deliver more value to the bottom line. Much the same thing that I do, and actually in much the same way that I do it. So I thought it'd be quite fun for us to have a conversation, because there's so many similarities between what we do and how we do it, and the way that we apply the skills that we bring as boutique management consultants to the workforce. Winnie is an interesting lady, and she has some great ideas. You're going to love it. Winnie, welcome to Wicked Problems. It's great to have you here. Tell me, what do you do?
I would describe myself as a digital transformation consultant. What that really means is I go into organizations, I help them understand their current workflow, what's working well, what's not working very well, and I make recommendations for improvements, particularly where I see there are gaps in the way they work. Maybe the gaps are there because they are wasting time, money, things are just effectively not as efficient as they could be. Once I go and look at how the land lays effectively, I then make recommendations for improvement and then support them through that chain. So my role there is in a project management capacity where I support them and work with the team to deliver the change. I work with various clients, mainly professional service providers, such as law firms or any industry that provides a service to a client.
What I heard in what you said there is very similar to kind of approach to how I go in with my clients, which is there's a period of discovery there, right? Where you're working out what are the problems they've got. Like they might come to you and say, we've got this problem, but often, at least my experience is often that clients think they can misinterpret a symptom as being the problem. And so what you need to do is to go and actually do a formal diagnosis so that you can then agree with them, well, this is the actual problem. That sounds like the approach you take.
Yeah, definitely. So to get to the problem, and I call that the root cause, I want to understand what is the root cause. What is the root cause of your symptoms? So I organize discovery sessions. Those discovery sessions can be one-to-ones or group workshops, where we spend time to understand what the process is, what are the reasons for the delays, what are the reasons for the loss in money. And so I ask them a series of probing questions, the stakeholders a series of probing questions, just to understand exactly what the root cause of a symptom is. And a lot of the time, what they call a problem is actually just the tip of the iceberg. There is a root cause more often than not.
Yeah, so it's what they can see, but not necessarily what's happening sort of under the hood, as it were.
Exactly.
I tell you something that I've come across in the past, which is I go in and people go, well, we'd love to work with you, but do you really know my SaaS system inside out, or my CRM, or my sales system, or whatever? I mean, it looks like you've only got experience with 15 different CRMs, not my one.
I know, and I find that quite annoying. And I understand why they might have a preference for someone who's experienced in using their particular software. But I think as a consultant, you don't need to know every CRM. I think you typically need to understand that that the business want a place where they want to hold their case data. They want a place where they can manage their service delivery, so a practice management solution, and they want a place where they can either collaborate, communicate, access documents, share and exchange information. So I think fundamentally, and I understand that that's quite a simplistic view, but if you understand where the endpoints are, where data needs to flow between one system to another, and you understand the containers of the process, then I don't think you need specifically to have experience in a particular CRM or software. I just think it's a preference at this point, but it's not a requirement. It's not a must-have.
It's not a must-have. It's a nice to have, but it's not a must-have because systems change all the time. New ones come onto the market.
Exactly.
New languages come onto the market. Programming languages or even approaches to how we tackle problems. And as a consultant, I mean, I've been in management consulting a very long time. And as a management consultant, what I found is, it's beholden on me to be able to learn all of these things really quickly. Otherwise, I can't do a really good job for my client. And so you learn strategies of how to really quickly absorb information about not just the systems, but also the system of work within the organization, the way the organization is, if you like, designed. Sometimes it's not designed intentionally, but how it's designed or how it's come together and how everyone's interacting and working together. I don't know about you, but when I go through these sort of discovery sessions, sometimes, people think, well, if we only had a better CRM or if only we had a better sales capture tool or whatever, only to find that that's not really the problem. The problem is something else. The problem is maybe the organization's a bit too siloed, or there's not enough clarity about how work gets handed off from one team to another, that sort of thing. Do you find that sort of problem or that sort of, does that resonate with you?
No, definitely it does. I mean, I worked with one law firm who were literally losing about 18 hours a week on admin, which is significant for a busy criminal law firm. And so their suggestion was to change their PMS system. But when I did the interview and talked to the team, what I actually learned was that they hadn't actually configured the system correctly in the first place. And so they weren't actually utilizing the benefits that the PMS system could have offered them had they configured it properly in the first place, which is why I say sometimes the symptoms that the clients complain about are not always the root cause of the problem. And so that's a really, really simple example of where people think they know what they need when actually they haven't really understood the problem in the first place.
And it's not their fault, really, is it? Because why would you not come to the conclusion that people come to, given that's what's presenting to you? It's a natural conclusion to come to. And I think the thing is that people at least then recognize, well, we have got a problem. We need to bring somebody who can help with that problem. And then when they come to us, maybe they're saying, oh, well, do you really know, the system that I use? But I think what they're really looking for and what they're really asking for without knowing it sometimes is, can you help me diagnose my problem? Can you help me build a way out of this problem so that we don't encounter this problem? That's where I think a lot of the value in consulting lies.
And I think it's also helping them spot the loopholes outside of technology. I think businesses are quick to jump to tech as a solution, the hero, but often it's as simple as an organizational rearrangement. Move the people from one area of practice to another, or just redeploy the way you allocate resources, or change the template that you use. Sometimes it's as simple as that, but you almost need somebody outside of the organization to look at it objectively and give you that feedback, and then it becomes a little bit more clear. Sometimes talking through a problem helps elucidate it.
Yeah, because if you're too in the weeds, it's difficult. It's that forest for the tree thing, right? And so somebody with a fresh pair of eyes who's not maybe as familiar with what's going on can actually see the problem more in a much more constructive way that really helps the client. And as you say, I mean, my experience is, you can get a lot more value sometimes without changing the system. I'm not saying you should never change the system, because that is the right thing to do. But, it's possible to go in and see, okay, well, look, these two teams are siloed. They're not talking to each other. Actually, if we can get them talking to each other and get them understanding how to talk to each other, suddenly that unlocks more flow through the system of work, which means that more work being delivered more quickly, which means there's more value being added to the bottom line. And that work isn't getting, to your point, that 18 hours of blockage isn't now happening, or maybe it's still happening, but it's only 2 hours instead of 18. So you've solved a fundamental part of the problem, even if you haven't changed an IT system at all.
There's value for money in calling somebody in who has experience in different ways of working. I think outside of using your specific software, somebody that can come in and see and tell you what's worked, or at least show you what has worked well in other organizations, will save them an expense at a later point. Maybe they don't need new technology. Maybe they just need to tighten the configuration of an existing system. Maybe they need to change the way the handovers happen. Maybe they need to review a process and how that connects to their existing case management system, and that would save them. Just that analysis alone can be the difference between 50K and, I don't know, a $2,000 audit. $2,000 audit will save you 50K. Is ultimately worth the investment, really.
Yeah, and that's really worth it. And actually, often it'll save them much more than 50K, particularly if it's a problem that would compound over time. You're bringing more value, way more value than the cost to do it, which is a great thing. And I mean, the other thing I look at as well, but I don't know if it's something that you look at as well, but it's is like cost of delay. Like, if I don't fix this problem, how much is it hurting me every week that it's still a problem?
Yeah.
And if I've got 6 or 7 problems, I can make that cost estimate for each one of them, and that then tells me which problem do I want to try and address first. And that gives me as a business, or gives my client as a business, a way of prioritizing economically, so that they can then see that value coming back to them quickly.
Exactly. And I was having a conversation recently with a client who was debating whether to go ahead with the data migration project or not. And the cost of that data migration was going to be significant, because they needed to download data from a case management system. And the alternative to that would be to delay that data migration over a period of 12 months. Ultimately, sometimes it might not be financial loss, but it's the loss in time. It's the loss in capacity in your team resource, because they're wasting time on admin to do one thing or the other. So I would certainly spend a lot of time looking at the cost of delay and the benefits of doing something at an earlier point, or if not at an earlier point, at a point where it makes sense financially, but also in terms of operational efficiency. So those conversations are sometimes difficult, but ultimately the goal is to ensure that the client leaves and has an experience where their operational processes are simple, they're properly managed, and they're cost effective, because it all becomes a question about the impact on the bottom line,
What sort of challenges do you think are unique to those firms that maybe others don't encounter, like the big banks might not encounter, or is it really, do you think actually a lot of these problems, maybe they happen across the board? They're not unique to, we might all think that we have a unique ecosystem within which we sit, but actually a lot of the problems, a lot of the methods that you use and that I use, maybe they can be applied and cross-pollinated, and maybe there is a value to doing that. To your point earlier, where you said, somebody coming with a fresh pair of eyes, looking at the problem from the perspective of someone who hasn't been sat with the problem for a long time, can help really fundamentally change the interpretation of that problem and lead to a better diagnosis, so that the remedy can be more fully applied. Do you think that's true cross industry as well?
I think you can cross-pollinate. Definitely you can. I think as a consultant, though, I do understand when a client is looking for a particularly a consultant that is experienced in a particular industry. And that's simply because the language between industries might be different. So what I've understood as a practice management system in the legal sector is a case management tool in the banking sector. And yes, common sense shows you that the processes and the containers for the work are the same. I think the issue for me boils down to the language and the nuances in the language used between one industry and the other. And the workflow configuration could differ between one system and the other. But that doesn't mean you couldn't learn it as a consultant. I just think if you are working with an organization that's trying to manage project budgets and resource, and they haven't got space to be on a project for a long period of time, it's usually quicker for them to get somebody who has done it before and can just implement faster. But I definitely think our skills are relevant across the board. I just think it's a preference at the end of the day. And it's about managing time and money for the client.
And I can completely see where there are going to be times where getting somebody who can speak the language, as you said, who knows, maybe there's very specific systems that a client's using, could be a quick win, right? And so, I wouldn't discount it. But there is value, particularly I think with a more complex a scenario is, where someone with a completely outside view can come in and go, okay, I've seen this pattern before elsewhere, and maybe I don't know the exact language nuances that you have, dear client. But I'm an intelligent person because I'm a consultant. I can pick it up pretty quickly, but I'm going to help you really get under the hood and diagnose this, and it's going to be actually cost effective for you as well.
Yeah, and I hear that too, and I don't mind going into a room and sounding like the silly person that's asking the silly questions, because it makes people think outside the box. Like, realistically, when we are trying to build a solution, we need to make that solution usable by anybody, right? Because otherwise, what's the point? You are a business that hires staff, and you have a business that have clients from different backgrounds. You need to know that we are answering a silly question, because the solution needs to be as simple enough to use as possible. And so I don't mind going in with an objective eye and asking the daft question, because it causes the client to think about what they're building a lot more closely than, I could go in with my big consultant language and talk about efficiency gains and, but that doesn't mean anything to Sally in accounting that's fresh out of grad school and doesn't understand the benefits of that particular feature or process to her work. So
there's another skill I think you're talking about here, which you have to have to be an effective consultant, which is the translation capability.
Exactly, yeah.
And being able to translate between the very specific argot or language of a niche, let's say. So that's one thing, being able to translate that into sort of more general conceptual language. But then there's also the ability, Sally from accounts needs you to talk to her in one way. The person in the C-suite needs you to talk to them in a completely different way, because they have different pains that they're dealing with in their day-to-day work. They have different issues. And then, you people in IT often don't speak the same language as the people in the business, so you need to translate that way. And these are all skills that you've built up as a consultant.
Yeah, you quickly become the communication gap between these different stakeholders. You need to understand what the senior leadership want versus what the people in the grassroots need to do their job effectively. And then you need to think about the end users of each of those systems. It's not always going to be the internal team. It might be the external client. It might be other stakeholders. I don't know, depending on the scenario. But, and also when I started in consulting, when I started in the tech industry, I wanted to understand what I was doing. I wanted to understand what the cause and effect of one change would have on another. And so I needed to understand it in the most simple terms. You know, those government tech projects where they build a solution, you know, like the .gov website. I think they're really good because they are really simple. And so when I'm building a solution, I almost want to look at it from a user-focused solutions.
Yeah, so you're thinking about the user experience and how to make that as frictionless as possible.
Exactly, but not even just user-focused, but almost anti-discriminatory experience. So you are catering to simple Joe blogs. You're catering to somebody who takes a little bit longer to understand the concept.
Yeah, so let's say people of my parents' generation often struggle with tech because they weren't brought up on it. You can't say, "Oh, that generation is stupid," because they're not. But this stuff is so alien and unfamiliar to them.
Exactly.
As I'm sure something will be when I reach an older age, which is obviously a long time from now. But we'll have that problem too, presumably, and I'm sure the generations that preceded my parents' generation had issues with certain understanding. What newer things like. In fact, I do remember my grandfather struggling to understand when car dashboards suddenly were slightly more electronic and not just levers and buttons, right? And it's like couldn't quite get their head around it, and that's because it was so unfamiliar. It wasn't mechanical anymore. Yeah, so you're what you're describing there, that non-discriminatory. I like that because it's being able to cater to everyone to the greatest extent that you can.
Exactly. And that's for the internal use as well as the clients that you onboard.
And a professional services firm may have its own internal language, even within its discipline, but its clients may not know that language. And so you've got to be able to be asking a question from the perspective of that user as well.
Exactly. But also, if you think about these larger professional service providers, they've got different departments. And Frank is excellent at his job in his department, but the solution you're rolling out will affect how he does his work. So I need to remember Frank could be my 70, 60-year-old mum, for example, in the school department. I don't know. She's not bothered about the technology itself, but she knows that it's now a mandate for her to deliver her work properly, that she needs to enter information into this new client record system. And so my thought is I want a system that when I'm talking to these stakeholders during a workshop, I'm using the simplest language. If I can't explain what we're building to a 12-year-old, then we're not going to deliver a system that's going to be meaningful. And remember, when we're thinking about user adoption, when we're building this solution, we need to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing, understands how it will affect their work, understands the language that's built into these systems for them to use it ultimately. So I'm thinking, user experience is one thing, but building a solution that will be meaningful to anybody using it, anyone, any department. You could be great in your department, but not great in finance. But the finance department needs to understand what it might mean for somebody in marketing and vice versa. So, there is the interconnectedness of a system, and professional service providers sometimes, particularly the larger ones, have to bear in mind that the system needs to be usable by everyone. But I'm also mindful that I need to communicate what we're doing, what we're building to the different stakeholders in a different way to make sure that everybody's aligned on this big project that we're embarking on,
Yeah, makes total sense. And I suppose there's another actor in this game, or this play, if you like, which is, new people into the firm also have to learn this and have to be able to grasp it quickly. And, we're very good at that as humans. Actually, we're very good at taking concepts and patterns and assimilating them and being able to work through them quickly. And I think people like yourself, consultants who go in and help these clients, have that as a skill. And it is a skill, and you've got to be able to do it quickly and synthesize that and get it back to people in the language and the way that they need it to be delivered to them. I mean, if I just said to you, what's a day in the life of Winnie look like? How would you answer that?
If I think about my working week, my working week starts off with a period in the morning where I do just admin. So from say 9 o'clock to 10:30ish, I spend time looking at admin. And in that time, I'm looking at my inbox and answering any unopened emails, sending out emails. I'm also looking at any plans or schedules that I've organized for myself and the team that I work with. So that's the admin piece. I'm also setting, not only looking at what needs to be done, i.e. my to-do list, I'm also setting goals and objectives for the things that I want to achieve in the week. I'll then have my first meeting typically at between 10:30 and 11. Those are usually my first meeting slots. And that's where I will be focusing on the heftier client meetings that are either moving the needle because we are planning, I don't know, the next phase of a project. There's also the time that I will book in any lead calls that I have to talk with clients about the service that I offer and how I can help them. And I typically put it in at that time because I've had the chance to prepare myself. It gives me a bit of a window of preparation, but it's also a good time for when my brain starts to get in gear and to think. My brain starts to whirl. And so then I have, in the afternoon, I typically book in like on-site visits in the afternoon, maybe around 11:30, 12-ish, around there, because they are also spaces where other organizations are taking lunch breaks. And so they're more open to a lighter conversation. By the afternoon, I'm having more meetings, but these are the meetings that are more update meetings, progress meetings, more so than the ones that are actually going to affect things. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And so on a Friday is typically the day that I do a lot of my playback meetings. We're looking at what we've achieved in the week. We're making plans for what we will do the week after. We're talking about risks and issues. But I think, yeah, that's how I typically break up my week. On Fridays, I send out reports on that day, progress reports at the same time. And then when Monday swings back around, we start all over again. On Monday, I'm talking about this is what you want to achieve. This is the timelines that we have. These are the budgets and the resources that we have. And this is how we're going to spend the rest of this week delivering to that objective, that goal.
No, so it's interesting because it just gives people an insight into how we work. It's not, we're working within people's, we have to work within the rhythm that the client has, but we also have to do all the things that we've got to do as well to make sure we keep on top of everything. So it's just kind of interesting, I think, for people to understand that. If people want to learn more about Yonder and what you guys do, where should they go?
I'm on LinkedIn under Winnie Barnwell. My website at Yonder Limited is yonderlimited.com. And my contact details are on there. So they can send me a message, give me a call, contact me via email. My details are also on my website, or send me a DM on LinkedIn.
I'll put those details in the show notes, so they'll be under here.
Thank you.
And then people can contact you. Indeed. And thank you very much. It's been great pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk again fairly soon.
Definitely.
And maybe come back and update us in 6 months or something.
Perfect. Thank you for having me, Toby.
If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss what's coming next. And if something we discussed today is landing close to home, a problem you're sitting with, a gap you can't quite close, that's exactly the kind of thing I work on. I help leaders and organizations work through genuinely complex challenges and come out the other side with clarity and momentum. I'm Toby. Come and find me at strategicflow.io or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you're dealing with.